after 4 on March the 15th, 2016. This is the meeting of the Independent Ethics Board for the City of Tallahassee, and I guess that's the call to order, so that's item 1. Item 2 on our agenda, and I'm going to talk a little fast because we got a lot of stuff to get through, is the minutes from the last meeting. We have an illness on the staff that is unfortunately more serious than most of us would wish any illness to be. And so we're a little behind on paperwork, so we will take those up at the next meeting. Obviously, anybody who wants to know what happened at the last meeting, there are audio tapes available. So from a public records perspective or a public access perspective, I think we're there. We just don't have the typed, 2 or 3 page summary. And there's video, as Julie says. And for those of you who submitted cards, what I'm going to intend to do is, rather than call people up, which we did some in the past at the beginning of the meeting and let them talk about whatever, where you've indicated a particular agenda item, when we get to that item, I'll call you at the beginning of that item and let you do your comments there. So we're having our discussion and your comments contemporaneously. Item 3 on the agenda is the Ethics Officer Report, and there were a number of items, printed items, so I'll let Julie take it away.
All right. Thank you. This is simply my monthly report as usual. So what it contains is a summary of what occurred since we last met. Notably, the City Commission did approve our supplemental budget request. Additional things that I did were attending the Community Redevelopment Agency meeting. There had been some questions about that, so I felt it was important to learn a bit more about that. The usual citizen inquiries and other items that are required. And I would point out, and I will share this when I give a presentation later, that our campaign contribution refund program is live as of today. So I think that's apropos for Election Day, that is now live. And I want to publicly thank the partners that assisted in getting that program together. So obviously the voters and the people that wanted this are partners. Likewise, there did need to be coordination with the city in getting the website established and a live PDF fillable form and a lot of moving parts that went into this process. And so I want to publicly thank those folks that assisted, and we'll be excited to see the results of that. And I've already had several media calls today to discuss it. The next item you have is a budget spreadsheet for this month. You have the call log, and then we did have a gentleman, Mr. Poitevant, who had some questions related to my report, which I tried my best to answer for him. So that is my report this month to the board.
Mr. Poitevant, is there any of this that you want to talk about or want us to talk about in more detail, or are you okay with the fact that the board members have and have read the exchange?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that the exchange is complete.
Why don't you come to the mic so the folks behind the glass are happy with me. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
He had a card for his 3, so.
sorry. Oh yeah.
But I'd hope, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I'm Ben Poitevant, 2341 Limerick Drive. What I had anticipated was discussing those items that I had on there on the email that I sent to you originally, so that they could be discussed in the public environment.
Okay. Well, let's look quickly at these. Your email on monthly report, a little more detail do I have, I'm blanking
On the monthly report, I just suggested that, because last month, as I recall, the ethics officer's report, Julie's report, was that it was in your folders.
Okay,
And
okay.
there wasn't
It's
one back
online.
there.
It's online, sir, too.
But
Yeah.
for us to discuss it a little bit in the meeting, okay.
And
He wants a
I think copies
printed
back there
copy.
too, because everybody's not going to walk in with their laptop.
Right,
So
right.
we could put copies back there, the public can get them. I know that, this is not the hottest show in town, I understand, but half a dozen of them back there might be helpful.
Okay,
I'm just looking for, I think, more transparency in some of the procedural matters that take, like
Okay.
budget discussions and those kinds of things.
And we will definitely do that from here on out. The monthly budget report available for public inquiry. We actually do have another, three-quarter time person who's.
We have one three-quarter time person that we have had for several months, and that was publicly discussed on several occasions. So, and she's typically over there taking minutes, and she's not due to illness. So we do have that person.
So on a going forward basis in our budget, I think you'd see Julie as a full-time employee, at least at the moment, a three-quarter time support person, Mr. Currington as a consultant, and eventually, although I would hope never, but eventually, potentially some expenditure for a prosecutorial something, maybe DOA.
Advocate, I think is what we called
An
it.
advocate, and potentially an appropriation that looks kind of like staff, but for an investigator, if we got into a situation where we needed an investigator, someone with investigative skills specifically. So all of those things, I don't know that they would all show in wages, but those are all things I would say that you would watch for in terms of our big expenditures, because our big expenditures are obviously going to be on people.
Well, you caught me kind of off guard, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I don't have it up on my laptop, and I can't see my copy of those emails.
Oh.
Can I borrow somebody's copy there so we can?
Yeah, mine is printed in microfiche because I forgot to reset my printer. If somebody's got a full-size copy.
Just need to stack back though, please. But that's the whole bunch, and they start trying to go back.
So that answers your question about is Julie the only employee. The temporary wages category, Julie.
That was a clerical error that I think actually Raul, when he speaks, he can actually speak to that. That was a clerical, and he's there, I'm looking back there, but he's there. I think he can explain that. I think that was simply a procedural error, and I think that's actually been fixed since your inquiry.
Thank you.
And then the other salary items?
Other salary
It
items.
says what is the category other salary items?
Was that the $1,500 for temporary employees? Was that the question?
I'm not looking, again, I don't see the actual,
Because you were asking about temporary wages of $1,500, and that was the mistake.
Well, and the next question is what is
other salary.
other salary items?
Well, I believe I explained that in one of my responses.
Yeah, well-
Other salary items would include things like benefits for the employees.
Okay.
So that would be, the city benefits for the assistant and for myself.
You mean as in retirement benefits and that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Talk about the board council billing and what source of funds for the rest of the year. I think that was in large measure the purpose of Julie going back and getting the budget amended so that.
And that's clearly shown in the documents that I provided to the board and that are on my report, how those funds have been allocated. So.
And we are, as we get closer to having our policies in place, I would expect that billing to go down.
Sure.
So.
Well, I'm not sure, Julie, if he said it was explained. Would you explain it to me now? The bill 21,502. What was it that I missed?
Well, we've had legal expenses and bills that we've had to pay, and that was one reason why I asked the commission for additional funds. Until those funds were approved by the commission, our bylaws give me the authority as the staff person to move money from the different budget categories to pay bills. So until we received that additional appropriation, money had been moved so that we could pay our outstanding balances.
So this was not for 1 month, this was for 4 or 5 months?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I appreciate that.
And then we paid, when your next item is when Julie did the city council ethics training, we bought them lunch out of our money, which is basically their money.
It's their money.
And I think the answer there was it was a long training session, and to be real honest, any money that we could spend to keep them in their seats and paying attention is probably well spent.
They appreciate that, and it does keep,
Sure.
it does, well, it's their money that they appropriated, so we're using that to sustain them as they're listening to the training.
Otherwise, I guess we could, if we don't do it, they'll buy it out of their money, but it's sort of
It's the same
all
pot.
comes from the same place. So that's just a judgment call.
Okay. So 223 for food was for the city council members?
Yes.
Well, it wasn't just them, sir. That was also their aides. It was also for the appointed officials and other members of the leadership team. So we had a full room. We also had guest lecturers, including retired judges and dignitaries, Pat Gleason. We wanted to be able to offer them a sandwich, so we did that.
Okay, thanks.
So on a per head
Pretty much what
basis, you want to guess what it was?
I don't want to guess.
Okay, were there more than 20 people in the room?
Most likely.
Okay.
Next was the question on the COGOL conference.
And sir, I very respectfully, this has been something that I reported on to the board after I attended. And
Tell us what COGOL stands for.
It's the Conference of Government Ethics Lawyers. There is one conference in the country where all ethics professionals in the government congeal together for 4 days, and these are people from all over the country and the world that exchange best practices for execution of ethics programs. So it's an extraordinarily beneficial program because to find a group of ethics professionals that gets together is kind of rare. So what I'm able to obtain from that is information that I come back and apply to this job.
Sure.
Additionally, this year I was able to actually I was asked to lead a group to talk about starting up local boards, and next year I'm being considered to actually be a panelist to talk about initiating these boards in communities and on our campaign contribution refund program. So I think the value that comes back to the board is the shared knowledge, and that comes out, I think, throughout the year.
I certainly never questioned that. I was just wondering about the expenditure, that's all. And I'm sure that it's a wonderful organization, a very professional organization, and I would assume because you went, you did get something out of it, and I appreciate that. And certainly in my professional career, I've been to lots of conferences, but some were good and some were not so good. But
I would tell you, I do use the information that they publish, some in other research that I do unrelated to this board.
Yeah. Well,
I'm going to encourage.
Mr. Chairman, is that, again, just perhaps I missed some of these explanations that Julie gave previously, and apparently I did. But I'm just asking for some transparency when we get these items on the budget. I think that at some point, we gotta ask.
Yeah, if I may, I mean, we approved this well before she attended the conference because we thought that it would be of value to us, and it has been. And
I assumed you had.
yeah.
And I'm going to actually suggest that next year that we see if we have a volunteer, maybe the vice chair is a good one to do it in any given year to attend, a member of the board also to attend this, because I don't think that we as board members can know enough about ethics. And then the last one, have any of us attended the ethics training presentations Julie's made? The prior chair discouraged us from doing that because she feared a chilling effect. I am going to take a different position, which I'll go ahead and just announce now since we're sort of on it, that I would like Julie to tell us when she does her ethics training, and I would encourage anyone to go with the caveat that we, as board members, we don't answer questions, we don't participate, we are there as observers. If anybody asks us anything, it is inappropriate, because the question they ask could in some form come before us. I think that's the thing that the prior chair was concerned about. I think that we're all adult enough to shuffle, mumble out a non-committal answer and stay out of trouble.
And as I shared with you, Mr. Poitevin, there will be a training for this board next month, which is definitely open to the public. The employee ethics trainings are conducted either by myself or a city staff member who's under HR. So, and you guys actually met her. That's Angela Hendrith. And you reviewed last year the ethics training materials that she uses. But most certainly, board members are invited to come. And for example, next week, there is a new board or new advisory committee starting up on parks, something to do with parks. And I was asked to come and talk to the board members about ethics. Now, what you're considering ethics training and what actually occurs in some of these advisory groups, I give them what they need to know, and I don't go through all of 112 because, you know, they're citizens sitting on an advisory group. I don't know if Ms. Phillips was on the Utility Advisory Committee when I came. I distill it down because they have long meetings or actually abbreviated meetings, so it's kind of a quick presentation. But I do provide information that's appropriate to what they're doing, and they do get written materials. So of course, any board member or any member of the public is always welcome.
Well, how does a member of the public find out where these meetings are occurring?
Well, the city has a calendar, and you can sort by meetings, and you can see that. I don't.
Oh, okay.
Julie,
I've been on the city site, and a lot, in my opinion, parts of it are not very user-friendly, but I can wade my way through and find what I want to find.
a question, Julie, would you, by the next meeting, tell us whether it would be possible for you to, at least for the ethics presentations you do, put them on our website? Because that way, any of us who wanted to attend could attend. Any member of the public who was maybe not interested in that board, but interested in the ethics could attend. And it might be that somebody wants to go to the city commission training. It might be that they want to go to the training for a particular board. And that would provide kind of one-stop shopping, at least as far as you're concerned. I'm not talking about whatever other ethics discussions they have that aren't us.
Sure. Let me, I can send it to you, but I mean, there's one, I don't know if it's next week or the week after.
Okay.
But like I say, it's going to be about 15 minutes. That's all the time I've been given on the agenda, so.
But we'll look and see if we can't publish that in an easy-to-use fashion. And I would point out that we have for us some ethics training coming up. Is it next month?
I shared that with him.
That's at length. But I have also asked Julie if we can, on a regular, like on a monthly basis, add ethics training for us at every one of our meetings in real small bites.
10 minutes.
Like a 10-minute presentation on some very narrow topic, so that we are just constantly picking a very narrow silo and going, I guess, up high in the silo. I guess how do you go deeper? High, I don't know.
We'll talk more about that on 12, though.
And Ben, we will, yeah, that comes up in 12. But since it's sort of here, I will mention that to you, that you can expect that we'll be getting in little pieces that are easy to digest a little bit more formal training, because I'm never sure that I know enough of the ethics laws and the ethics ordinances. And we're going to be talking about the distinction between laws and ordinances, and particularly in terms of the jurisdiction of this board at the next meeting also. So that'll be a fun discussion to look forward to.
Well, I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I certainly did not mean to imply that anyone was doing something under the table or in poor judgment or anything of the sort.
Right.
I just wanted more transparency, more explanation for public consumption, if possible.
Yes, sir.
Mr.
I think we got the message. Mr. Friedman.
Mr. Poitevin, actually, I welcome you doing this. I don't think any of this stuff can be, it always can be more open. And the more that the public engages, I think the better off the board is. Because one of the reasons there's a board is because there's a certain underlying mistrust in government per se today. I mean, you look at the presidential campaigns, you can see that. So I think it's very good that you come in and you bring these things up, and we've had, help from other folks too, and it's what you need. So that's great. Just continue to do it, please. In fact, try to get some more people to come.
I appreciate that.
Speaking of more people coming, if you're done,
Yes, sir.
I would announce that Ms. McNeil has an excused absence. She is traveling for work, and Mr. Ochitayo, I think, may end up being excused. He has some last-minute work conflicts. We are still hoping he will be here, but since we have 4 of the 6 or 7, depending on how you want to count us, we do have a quorum, so we're good to keep.
Did you get a message from me? Okay.
So we don't really. All the cards I have in terms of public comment are on specific agenda items, and I'll call them when we get to those agenda items. If nobody has any other general comments about the agenda, we would go on to Mr. Lavin on and your presentation.
And
Thank you for your patience as we nosh our way through our stuff.
And as Mr. Lavin is coming forward, I'm just going to tell everyone a little bit about him. He has been with the city for 23 years, and for the last 10 years has held various positions as part of the city's executive team. As the director of the Department of Management and Administration, he's been responsible for a number of areas, including accounting and financial reporting, budget and policy, procurement, information system services, HR, and workforce development. Currently, he serves as the Assistant City Manager for Administrative and Professional Services and is responsible for management of housing and social service programs, environmental compliance and facilities management, financial management, accounting, procurement, and the Minority Business Enterprise Office. And he's got his BA from Florida State, so go Knowles. And thank you, Raul, for being here and educating the board on what you do.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Meadows-Keefe. First off, let me thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about what I do and the responsibilities of my areas, and also to thank you for your service to the community as part of the Ethics Board. As Julie said, I've been here for a little over 23 years. I started off as an analyst with the budget office 23 years ago. I slowly worked my way up, became the budget director for about probably 4 to 5 years. After that, was appointed to the director of the Department of Management and Administration by the former city manager, Ms. Thompson. And that position was one of the 6 positions of the city's executive team reporting directly to the city manager. Most recently, as part of this latest reorganization that Mr. Fernandez implemented 2 months ago, I was moved into one of the assistant city manager positions, still retained a lot of the functions that I had, lost a couple functions, but also was given a lot more functions to make up for the ones that I lost. And that's always the case when you have reorganizations, I guess. But let me talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I've done over the last few years, since it's pretty much the same that I'm going to be doing moving forward. Obviously, one of the biggest areas that we've been working on, that we've been responsible for, has been the development of the city's budget and managing the budget process. And as you all know, last year was a quite controversial budget year. We had a lot of criticism about the process, transparency issues, and we are working very hard to address those issues. And I'll talk a little bit about that in my ending comments. So the budget office is one of the areas. Accounting services was one of the areas and still is one of the areas, and they're responsible for all the financial management and doing the financial statements for the organization. As you all know, we have to have audited statements turned into the state of Florida. We are just finalizing our audited statements. They're done by a third-party accounting firm, Thomas Howell Ferguson, in partnership with Law Red Crona, are the auditors that are doing the audit right now. They actually completed the audit, and the audit will be presented to the audit committee this week on Thursday, and then we'll go to the city commission, the first meeting in April. we have over $3 billion in assets, so you can imagine that our financial statements are pretty complicated since we operate the utilities, the airport, all the different services that we do. But we've been pretty lucky that the audits have been pretty clean the last 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and this year's is also a clean audit. The accounting services is also responsible for payroll, one of the most important functions for the organization. They issue paychecks for all employees. We do biweekly paychecks. They actually process right now 3 payrolls, payrolls for our active employees, payroll for our retirees, and payroll for the folks that are in drop. So it's a very complicated process. Payroll is always right, correct. They do a great job in processing payroll. Very, very few issues related to processing payroll. The next area is procurement services, and I'm still responsible for that. And Andre LeBroth, who's our procurement manager, was here, I think, a couple of meetings ago and gave you a presentation, a little overview of what we do. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But all the contracting for the organization, putting out bids, RFPs, making payments to contractors and vendors, all that's run through the procurement office. And Andre has a technical background, so he's really been focusing on automating that process and making sure that we don't have to process a lot of paperwork, that we automate it, that it's online, that it's easier for our vendors to submit payment requests, all that kind of stuff. One of the areas that I used to be involved in, I'm not yet, although I'm still involved because of the systems that we use for both the financial system and the HR systems, is the IT department. And I oversaw that for 10 years, all the technology infrastructure, all our systems related to the organization. And that now is reporting directly to the city manager as of a couple months ago. Human resources was also an area that I was responsible for, and I'm glad that that was taken away from me. It's one of those areas that is very tedious and very involved. We not only deal with regular employees, but we have 2 collective bargaining unions that we dealt with. So HR negotiated the collective bargaining agreements in conjunction with the city attorney's office and the police and the fire departments. They did all the wellness programs, employee benefits and enrollment, and all the recruitment for the organization, both at the executive level and all positions that are advertised. At one point, they were processing about 20,000 applications a year of people that were submitting applications for city jobs and screening those and making sure that they were eligible. So a lot of people want to come work for the city, and 20,000 applications with probably 3 to 4 staff people reviewing that. That's pretty much all they do all year round. Equity and workforce development was another one that I was over, and that's been merged into the HR function now. And HR is also reporting to the city manager now. And Angela Hendrith, which I think you've all met, manages that area. She's responsible for all our equity programs, intake of employee complaints related to ADA, reasonable accommodations, discrimination, all those kinds of programs. That office is the intake for employees filing complaints related to those issues. And they do all the training, all the mandatory courses that we require of our employees, our ethics, discrimination, customer service training that all employees have to go through. So those are some of the areas that I am still responsible for or was responsible for. Under the new reorganization, there's more focus on financial management instead of a tedious budget process that we've had for the last few years. So the budget office has been renamed financial management, and the focus there is to not have a budget process that lasts 10, 11 months, but really work with the departments on the financial management and figure out what resources they need and sort of try to streamline that process. Robert Wiggin, who worked for the electric utilities and had actually worked previously in the budget office, is under that area, now over that area. And community housing and human services is another area that I'm responsible for now, and that deals with all the housing programs that the city has, all the human services programs. We are partners with Leon County and the United Way on the CHSP process, which funds human services agencies in the amount of about $4.2 million every year. That's a combined process where everyone gets together, decides how those resources are going to be allocated. The city of Tallahassee puts in about $1.6 million of that, so we've got a big stake in that game. That's managed by Community Housing and Human Services, and the other component is just the housing programs, making sure that we're addressing affordable housing issues in the community, that we're rehabbing structures that need rehabbing in the community. A lot of that is funded through either state or federal dollars that come through us, but we're very involved in that area. The other area is environmental services and facilities management, and that used to be under the assistant to the city manager before. Assistant to the city manager, Michelle Bono, and the environmental piece was under Cynthia Barber. And this is just making sure you all know we have the electric power plants, we have the water and sewer treatment plants, we have gas distribution systems, making sure that we're complying with all the federal and state regulations relating to environmental issues, Clean Water Act, et cetera, et cetera. Facilities management, we are trying to we have probably about 1,200 structures that we operate, and that is everything from a picnic shelter to City Hall. And we're trying to get a handle on a consolidated or coordinated facilities management process, which we haven't had in the past. Everyone's sort of been doing their own thing. So part of my responsibilities, I've been tasked of bringing that all under one unit and try to figure out what our inventory is, what the condition of our facilities is, and develop a 5 to 10-year plan so we can plug that into the budget process to determine how much money we're going to need to make sure our facilities are up to standard. So that's a new area that we're really focusing on. And let me tell you, there's a lot of challenges there. The MBE office is the Minority Business Enterprise Office, and that is responsible for ensuring that our contracting and our procurement processes comply with our minority business enterprise ordinances. And that's something that's in flux right now. The county commission, who also has an MBE office, has appointed a citizens committee to look at their process, and the latest recommendations are probably to look at a consolidated city-county MBE office, and I think that recommendation is going to be coming back to the county commission at the end of next month. So we'll be working with the county on that issue. Yes, sir.
If I may, is that why this is showing us a vacant position? Are you intentionally holding that until you get these recommendations in place?
Yeah, the administrator retired in December, and we are keeping that vacant until we know what direction we're going. So, yeah, we will not be filling that position right now. So those are the areas I'm responsible for. Let me talk a little bit about the budget process, because we're really trying to focus on making this more transparent this year. And that's one of the city manager's commitments to the community and to the city commission of us increasing the transparency, streamlining the process, and making sure that people understand what our budget is. We have started that already. We assembled a group of 3 government professionals to come do a peer review. And actually, because of airline issues, only 2 made it to Tallahassee. One person, there was a snowstorm in DC and they couldn't get out, and they weren't able to make it. But we had folks that have been in the industry for 20 plus years in Florida, members of the Government Finance Officers Association. Actually, the person that wasn't able to come was the past president of GFOA, and we're really upset that he wasn't able to make it. But they spent 2 days here with us, a Friday and a Saturday, volunteer time, interviewing all the stakeholders in the community, both from people that are supportive of the city and the budget process to some of the folks that were very vocal about our budget process last year. And they have just released, we just got the report a couple days ago, and we'll be presenting that to the city commission next week. So the report from the peer review is online if you all want to check it out. But a lot of things that we already knew, increase the transparency, increase communication on the budget process, start the process earlier, make sure that the community is involved, try to figure out how to get the community involved by using more high-tech approaches than the traditional approaches that we've used before. So we're trying to implement some of those. One of the things that they've recommended that we've already started is implementing a concept called OpenGov, which is a platform that a lot of communities are using, which really provides the citizen an opportunity to really drill down on the budget, but in a graphical perspective, so they can really figure out, through the pie chart and drill down, and if they want to know how much money is spent on personnel for a specific division or unit, they can do that. Also, the open checkbook, which we already have on our website, but this is going to increase the visibility of the checkbook. It's going to be a lot easier to use. Probably a lot more information is going to be available related to the checkbook that what we currently have online right now. We are doing quarterly updates to the City Commission, which we haven't done in a long time. So our goal is to make sure that the commission isn't surprised, that we don't come at the end of the year with either surpluses or deficits, that throughout the process we're letting them know, hey, this is where we are, this is where we think we're going to be at the end of the year. We had our first update a couple months ago. We'll have another one next month. So that's something that we're doing out. We're definitely reaching out to the stakeholders. We've been in discussions with the Citizens for Responsible Spending. We actually met with them on Martin Luther King Day at tax watch offices and spent about 3 or 4 hours with them, just talking about the issues and getting input. We've met with them 3 or 4 times already, and we're also reaching out to some of the other stakeholders in the community to get input and give us recommendations on where they think we should be going with the budget. So all this is to increase the transparency, increase the process, improve the process, and this is one of the major projects that we're working on right now. So I think I've taken a lot of your time. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Members, questions? Actually, I have an assignment, if I can, for Julie. Would you send us, the board members, a link to their to the report on their budget review?
Absolutely.
So, since some of us are not as skilled as Mr. Poitevin at digging through the city website. And a question I have for you, working with some other folks as they've, not the city, but as they've tried to deal with electronic records, I hear a lot of concerns about redaction, where you can't have all the various statutes, whatever they may be, things get redacted from public records. The daycare center where the retired special risk officer's child goes or whatever. I mean, some things that may not be obvious to a clerk reviewing a paper record. Have you all run into big issues with redaction? Is that, and if you have, are there like substantial costs associated with that?
Usually anything that's prior to it being released, the city attorney's office and the treasurer clerk's office will review it to make sure that we're not releasing any information that statutorily we're not allowed to release. Mm-hmm. So that process will be, the request is made and they'll review it to make sure that there's no sensitive information and they'll redact it. Okay, so that's on their side of the net. Okay, and I see Mr. Shelley is moseying toward us. It's the reason I ask is that prior to electronic records, it seemed to me in my government service, when someone would come and ask for documents, we would redact them upon request. Now, if everything is going to be put on the internet, you've got some responsibility to redact when you put it on the internet, but then every year the legislature changes what has to be redacted. So you could be in a situation where you had people working full-time trying to double-check hundreds of thousands, millions of documents. So your comments, sir.
It's a hugely time-consuming part of our job. Every year, the amount of hours that the government spends on responding to public records grows exponentially. Just in the area of public safety, for example, the variety of exemptions and how they reach out into different areas, utilities, job applications, parks and recs applications to play a particular youth sport, for example. We have to have folks in all the departments familiar with the potential redactions that they may have documents that relate to. And we used to do it by hand. Would pull out the document. We would make a copy of the document. Then we'd do a whiteout and white out the redaction. Well, now we do the same thing electronically, but it is, as you mentioned, it's constantly changing. Every year, the legislature makes one or more changes in terms of the exemption. So a government our size, with over 2,000 employees just spends an awful lot of time doing that, and the treasurer clerk's area is the official records keeper for the city, and they have more than one person working full-time just receiving them and getting information back from the various departments.
While I have you at the microphone, are there any questions from anybody else? For my own edification, when you get public records requests, when somebody in the city gets a public records request, at whatever level, because you have an official responsible for records, do those flow through a central point, or in terms of responding to public records requests?
They do flow through a central point, and that is so that we'll have some organized system to make sure that we're responding, and we're responding timely. Having said that, we also know that the law as it exists now, that if you walk into my office and you ask for my calendar for the month of March, and I have it right there, I'm not permitted to say, well, put in a request, send it over to Treasurer Clerk, and when then he'll send me an email and I'll give it to you. So we routinely do training on public records requests so we don't get in gotcha situations, which almost every public entity in the state has been in, and we certainly have inadvertently from no intent on our part. But we have to train folks, the clerk that may be sitting at the front desk during the lunch hour. If a person walks in, what's the appropriate thing to do? If a particular document is asked for and he or she finds out that there is a document there, we want that provided right then so that we're in compliance. But at the same time, we want follow-up through the treasurer clerk's official record keeper so that we have some record of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I took us down a rabbit trail, but I appreciate your patience with my questions. Any more or any other questions for Mr. Lavin? Thank you, sir. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate your service. You got a lot of years in here. We'll go on to agenda item 6. My goal would be to finish that, and then we'll take a break, because I think we may be on number 6 for a few minutes. We've had this on 2 prior agendas. We haven't really ever talked about this idea, a pledge. I'm now kind of calling it a personal ethics statement. And I want to describe to you the process I'd like to go through. I've given you a draft that's a little more than a half a page, where I've tried to take elements of all the things we've talked about. There are 5 freestanding things. We could adopt none of them. We could adopt any 1, 2, 3, 4, or all 5 of them, or we could add to them. But before I do that, I want to get a sense. There are 4 of us here. Is there anybody who would not want to move forward with a discussion? Because if there's no will on the board to move forward with this, then we don't need to spend the time on it.
Can I say,
Mr. Friedman?
I favor something like this. When I finished working for the federal government, I held a procurement level position. I was amazed how little was requested by the state compared to what I had to file federally. Federally, I had to give them a complete breakdown of my net worth in addition to everything else. I mean, to the penny, almost. And I think that any disclosure that we make is good.
Okay.
I'm not sure that you want to, it's precise investments, but I think that it's important that folks see that you're not linked to some business, which, does business with the city, something like that.
Okay. I've asked the staff to, on a regular basis, put on the desks in front of us the referendum amending the city charter, because I think we commonly find ourselves going back to that. If you go on the back of the page where it says the first full paragraph, the ethics board shall 2, adopt bylaws and due process procedures for the administration of the ethics board. That would be what we would be, that would be the authority that we would be exercising here. There is no other authority. There's nothing in this that talks about a pledge or a personal ethics statement. So anything we do would have to be under this general concept of adopting bylaws and due process procedures. I think it's pretty clear that this would apply only to us and not to anyone else, any other city employee or officer, since we are not a legislative body. We are, at best, I think, a quasi-judicial body, even in the investigatory realm. State attorneys, public defenders are considered quasi-judicial, so I think we fit in quasi-judicial, and we don't have a role in telling in making any ethics policies for anybody outside of ourselves. So let me tell you go through this quickly, and I'll tell you the 5 things that I kind of distilled out of all of the paper we've had. And some people will think this is too much, and some people will think this is too little, and I suspect that Baby Bear won't have a role, or anybody will think it's just right. So A is, I'll voluntarily file the disclosure that is required, that the city has required for its elected officials, and that's on the next page. You can see the ordinance that has financial disclosures for elected officials, where you would disclose business relationships with city vendors, with city employees, membership on boards, land ownership. You would file a form disclosing that. That would be one thing we might consider in terms of a personal ethics statement, would be to do the same things the City Commission does. B would be, and I think Ms. Phillips is this is largely her brainchild, that you would pledge to complete annual ethics training, and more than sitting through ethics training, really understand the consequences of ethics violations. So the idea there is that you're kind of promising to try to know more than the average person, and really try to be well versed in ethics matters. C is what I think we heard in testimony, particularly at our last meeting, not to use my service on the board to obtain any financial benefit from the city for myself or any member of my immediate family. And I intentionally didn't define immediate family. I would consider that to be people who live with me or people who are financially dependent on me if they don't live with me. And I specifically excluded reimbursement for performing board-related duties, so that if one of you wants to go to the Kogel meeting next year and the city or the board pays for your travel, that's, you're not getting anything. Where was this last meeting?
Was in Boston, and next year's New Orleans. Okay,
well, New Orleans, so maybe you want to pay for part of it yourself. But if you got reimbursed for part of that travel, that it wouldn't violate this personal ethics statement. And I think that's probably the one that we've heard about the most, because that's the most direct thing, is I won't make money from serving on this board. D is I won't be an employee or elected or appointed official of the city, a lobbyist, or a candidate for office or an applicant for a position with the city while I'm on the board. And all of these relate to you see this beginning up above A, it says during my term on the board. So all of these start with that phrase. And then you could go on to extend that and say, and I was not an elected or appointed official or a city employee for X years. And for some people, that might be, you might leave city employment and immediately get appointed to this board. And I don't know that that would be a bad thing, because you certainly would know how the city operated. That would depend on the person, not the fact that they held a position with the city. And then E is I'll not perform any contract work for the city or the board or supervise or have direct responsibility for any person who does perform contract work. And again, you could add to that, and I didn't do this for a period of X years before being appointed to the board. So those are the 5 that I tried to, it's not my recommendation, but those are the 5 where I try to distill the essence of all of the pieces of paper that we have seen. And with that, I would gladly accept comments, questions, concerns. Mr. Friedman.
D and E, what I would, I was not for a period of at least X years before being appointed to the board without disclosure. I think if it's disclosed, there is no issue, and someone should not be automatically precluded by virtue of having served elsewhere. So I think it's very, very important that rather than, not having someone who's, having a specific period, you have to disclose that for X number of years prior to being appointed, what you've done in regard to any type of city appointment or elective official.
My thought here was that the pledge, if you will, would actually have a blank. So if I went from being a city employee, I quit on Tuesday and I got appointed to the board on Wednesday, I would put a 0 there. Or if I had a 1-year gap, I'd put a 1.
I would prefer to take a period that's definite, 5 years, and say, what have you done for 5 years? What things have you done, or 2 years, or whatever? It doesn't matter. I mean, the period is not as important as the principle.
Okay.
I think anything is along this line is okay, as long as it's disclosed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Phillips.
As I recall, I did 2 things before and after, immediately after being appointed. The disclosure, which was on my application, which included being on the City Utilities Advisory Board, so that was fully disclosed. I disclosed also the Southern Shakespeare Festival, which this year received money. I resigned from both of those, but that's where for me, I believe the disclosure came in. And secondly, to your statement, Mr. Friedman, that was we actually complete a financial disclosure, which is what you talked about originally, I think. Yeah. That's your point. We already do that financial disclosure, and we are required to do that. So disclosure, so at this point, I've done a financial disclosure. And secondly, I've also disclosed whatever activities I had prior to being appointed to the board in my application.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, on D, my concept there was that those were paid positions, so I would not include I had not meant to include, volunteering with the city or being on a board. So you could, on the 3rd line of D, where it says any office or position, you could put any office or paid position with the city.
Well, it says appointed official of the city, which I was an appointed official of the city and that's the phrase that caught my attention.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I had not meant, I see your point, and I think I did draft that poorly. I had not meant to capture volunteer work. I was trying to avoid this again kind of goes back to money changing hands. I wouldn't being paid by the city and put on this board.
May I posit something? What if you were a member of an organization that had volunteers, and it was very special to you, and somehow you used the city position to funnel money to that pet project of yours? Again, it's a very nice thing, and it's something that everybody should do, but I still think there's a problem. Mm-hmm. So I don't think you exclude volunteer. I think that it probably needs to include any organizations that you've been an officer of or something along that line, because the potential for taking money and let's assume you belong to a golf club and you decide, geez, this is getting awful expensive to maintain. Maybe we get the city to throw some money in, and they come up with some way of cooking the thing around. I mean, that's an ethics problem, potentially. Right,
and there are actually opinions from the State Ethics Commission, 2 people who've said, I serve on a local human services board, or, and we ultimately provide some services to people. Yeah. I'm an unpaid member, and we want to get a grant from a local government, but I'm somehow related to that local government, and the Ethics Commission has basically typically come back and said, unless it's a sealed bid situation, then you can't do it. You got a conflict, and yep. There's at least 3 different state ethics provisions.
That's the type of thing I was considering, yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Phillips.
I'm going to bring up the issue that I brought up last time, and any information from Mr. Shelley would be, I would value. I'm very concerned about, I guess, overreaching so that it becomes very difficult for the principals to appoint someone for a position on this ethics board. And I'll use my example. I mean, I used it last time, but, you know, my father was in the banking, and he was an upstanding individual in the community. I'm sure there are bankers in this community that would be fantastic members of this board.
We have one.
Okay, right, Vicki. So I cannot imagine that it would be beneficial to this board to exempt someone like Vicki
Renee.
or like my father, because they have to sign this policy or pledge, or what are we calling it now, a personal ethics statement. And it's not just in the bank. I mean, it's Florida A&M, it's Florida State University. My concern is that we will have a difficult time filling positions on this board.
Why? If somebody has done everything they've done out in the open, what do they have to fear about disclosing something?
Okay, I will use a banking, and Mr. Shelley, I'd appreciate your help. I'll use the banking, for instance. And my father was, you weren't here at the last meeting, so you're not aware of my story that I told. He was in a community which had a bank, an independent bank. The closest bank, other bank, was 25 miles away. He served on many boards in that small community of 1,200 people in the town itself. He certainly benefited because he was a president and chairman of the board when the city of Branford deposited money into his bank. I mean, there's no way of getting around it. The closest bank's 25 miles away. Now, everybody knew that the city of Branford had had a banking account in Branford State Bank. Did my father use his position on a board to get that account? No. Did he personally profit? You could say he might have. I mean, he was president of the board, but everybody knew it.
I'm sorry, I fail to understand your point. If he disclosed who he was and what he did and the nature of his business with the city, then I don't see why he wouldn't be able to be on any board.
Well, it would look like it was an impropriety. Whether or not there was is one thing, but this is not, maybe
Well, and I'm not sure what in here. I think certainly A, B, C, and E don't capture that situation at all. And I'm not sure that D would capture that situation, because D's talking about having an actual position. In your father's situation, he wouldn't be getting a financial benefit for himself or a member of the immediate family if the city did business with his bank, because it was the only bank in town. So it wouldn't fall under C. I don't think.
I would say it would.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Davis.
And that's what I was thinking too. I don't see that example personally falling within any of these possible elements. I can see how you're extra worried in that example that your dad might give the appearance of impropriety or seeking some benefit from his board service, but I don't know that that would fit.
If I may, the relationships he would have had pre-existed his being appointed to the board. And so unless somehow he invade the board to somehow do something to his financial benefit, this stuff, as long as it's disclosed ahead of time, would be irrelevant. His relationships, the fact that that they had to bank with him because there was no other bank, essentially, it's saying, I will not use my service. The service on this board directly to that is one thing. Something that's done by other folks is very, very indirect, and as long as it's disclosed, I can't see where it would be much of a problem. I mean, if it's the only bank they have to deal with, they're going to deal with them. whether he's on a board or not. Therefore, I don't see that it fits into any of these as being essentially problematic.
What if we use an example then, and nowhere in here does it say you have to disclose it and then it's okay, but, so I'm not sure unless I'm missing something.
Well,
But
perhaps we need to be, rewrite it a little bit to get that point across. I think that's the thing, and that's what you're complaining about, and I think that we can work on. But I don't want to preclude someone from public service by virtue of the fact that they have a pre-existing situation in regard to business. I mean, I don't have any problem with, I mean, for instance, when the university, FSU, had a vote on the wood plant that was going to be generating energy, the president disclosed it, and then the vote went on. And I don't even believe that he abstained because he disclosed where he stood. And it was not him doing it, it was his wife. And he went on. I think the disclosure is the thing. If people know what you're doing, I don't think there's any issue. And we need to find some way of conveying that, I think.
I think, now I'm not sure about C. I think on D, the way we could get there would be to take the first sentence and make it apply to salaried people. Add a new second sentence that says, I'll disclose any volunteer positions with the city, period. And then the third sentence would be, and I wasn't a salaried employee or official for a period of at least 3 years before being appointed
I don't know if
the board
I'd say
without disclosure.
volunteer with the city, I'd say volunteer in the city.
Okay.
I think is more precise.
But
That might be a volunteer. They're not really supposed to do anything else with the city.
yeah, Julie's pointing out, and go back to the charter, please. The bottom of page 1, Ethics Board, hereby create an independent, appointed, ongoing Citizens Ethics Board, 7 members and membership, blah, 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 blah. Shall consist of registered City of Tallahassee electors who have appropriate subject matter expertise, none of whom may be an officer or employee of local government.
And an
So that's
officer-
more than just city. That would be a county, a water management district, a school district. So I think we're already, every time I read this, there's something new.
Mr. Chair, I think what I'm also suggesting is the reason I go and give ethics training to our advisory committees is that those folks that are serving on those volunteer boards are considered officials, government officials, and I know they are for purposes of 112. And so the way, and of course we have our own counsel and the city attorney standing there, but I think the intent was that members of this board aren't otherwise involved with other city activities. Hence, we had Ms. Phillips resign her spot on the Utility Advisory Board, like we had Ms. Jaber do the same. I think the intent is that you are an official. If you're an advisory board member for the city, and you can't do that and be on this board, you have to choose.
Then we need to come right out and say that bluntly. Well, why play games with it? Just say it.
Well, I think that's kind of what D does, the way it's written, which is not, as I said, not exactly what I intended, but I think that may be what it says. And obviously, the charter amendment can, for certain purposes, can be read even more broadly, because you couldn't be an employee of the county or the school district. Or the
State.
Then it should
No,
say, may I suggest, while serving on the ethics board,
remember,
I will not.
go above A. Every one of these starts with during my term on the
All
board.
right, yeah, so that does it.
Ms. Phillips,
yes.
throw something at me if you want.
Oh, we've got Lou.
I'm sorry, Mr. Shelley. And then we're going to go to cards.
My thoughts is that it's a bad idea, and it's an idea that's unnecessary. It's an idea that, in fact, expands the requirements to be on this board, and it infringes upon the city's rights, the state attorney's rights, the other people that appoint to select people, even if it is in a minor way that people don't want to sign this, that's not mentioned at all as a requirement. Of course, you're subject to 112 and you're subject to the city's code of ethics. Of course, if there's a conflict and a matter comes up, you're going to abstain from it. To make this additional requirement is unnecessary and is restricting the applicant pool from the folks that make the appointees, the specific appointees to this board. The commissioners that I've talked to, and it's been a majority, are all against this idea. They think it will exclude people. It's exclusionary by the simple idea that you have it. It doesn't mean that you're not complying with state law, Chapter 112. It doesn't mean that you're not obviously complying with the city's code of ethics.
Thank you, Mr. Shelley. Okay, we'll go to cards. Mr. Wilcox, you're the next card on my stack here.
Thank you, Chair, Herring, and board members. I'm Ben Wilcox with Citizens for Ethics Reform, and I want to briefly address this issue of the Conflict of Interest Pledge. Citizens for Ethics Reform believes that there is a need for ethics board members to be held to a higher standard than members of other city boards. The purpose for this sort of conflict of interest pledge is to give the citizens of Tallahassee, who voted overwhelmingly for the charter amendment, some confidence that members of the board are truly independent of the city and are not beholden or benefiting from the city while serving on this board. It's for your benefit, as much as for the public's benefit, that the pledge you adopt should be simple, clear, strong, and without wiggle room or loopholes, and it should be mandatory for all board members to sign and comply with. I urge you to either craft a conflict of interest pledge that truly gives the public confidence in the independence of this board, or don't adopt a pledge at all. I would rather have no pledge than one that gives citizens false confidence. I would also recommend not taking a final vote on the pledge today, but wait for your next meeting so the public can see the finalized version. Thank you.
Two members.
Let me just add one comment here. I was planning, if we go forward with this, I was planning to treat it like any of the other things that we've adopted in terms of our operating procedures, where we discussed at one meeting, do any wordsmithing and bring it back at the next meeting for a final vote. And I also think it's something where all 6 of us ought to be here if we do have a product that we vote on. So I would agree, certainly, if we do anything, it would be formally, it would be at the next meeting.
Question.
Excuse me. Yes, Mr. Friedman.
Why don't we do one thing before we go on? Let's take a vote and see if we even want to have one of these. Yes, no.
Well, let me not accept that motion for right now, and let me let Mr. Poitevin, because he's the other card I have, let me let him speak, and then I will take that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some months ago, we initially discussed the reasons for, or the attractiveness of, or the need for this board to not only express its independence from the city in every possible way, but to somehow rise above the standards that all other appointed and elected officials must meet under Florida law. The idea was to let the citizens of Tallahassee know that the standards that this board lives by and operates by are higher than the standards of any other board, including the City Commission in the city of Tallahassee. This board is the conscience of ethics in this city. And in that posture, it has been my strongest recommendation this board say, Florida statutes are not enough. It's not okay to have a conflict, even if it's announced. Chapter 120 basically says, it's okay to have a conflict between your public and private life as long as you make the public aware of it. And I disagree with that. And I think an ethics board should disagree with that. I believe that an ethics board, above all, should say no conflicts will be tolerated. No conflicts will be tolerated. And this board must have peer review of those conflicts. And that has been my position from the very beginning. Mr. Chairman, you and I have discussed various wordings for the pledge of no conflict. It is simply a statement to the citizens of Tallahassee that the old way of doing business is not going to be enough for us. We are going to operate at a higher standard than other boards and commissions in this city do. And only by achieving that status can we be the court that rules, that reviews, that decides on the ethics of all others in the city, including the city commissioners, including the chief of police or the fire chief or the city auditor. This board was created for that purpose, not to be just another board. The citizens of Tallahassee anticipated you would rise above the standard that all others function under, and the same standard that creates all the inquiries and questions that this city has endured in the immediate past. Each of you here today must decide, are you going to have a higher standard so you can impose a standard on the city employees, elected officials, and all others? I respectfully submit to you that the personal ethics statement that you're looking at today, there's no reason to pass that. Those requirements are already imposed on you by state law or by city standards. I don't think I see anything there that is already expected of you, either by the city or by the state. Of course, you have to file financial disclosures. The law says so. You complete annual ethics training. Well, the city, all members of the city do that. I will not use my service on the board to obtain a financial benefit. Well, that's already expected of everybody that works for city government. I will not be a paid lobbyist. I will not be an employee of a paid lobbyist or anybody doing business with the city. That's already a standard that Mr. Shelley's already made clear. That's a standard already. I will not perform contract work for the city or the board or same thing. You know, of the various items we have discussed as a possible pledge to make this board tell the citizens of Tallahassee, we're not just another board. We're not just another political group that you're not even paying attention to. Or all you're doing is questioning what they do, whether they're doing the right thing or not. Don't always put yourself in a position where you will not be questioned. This board, by its very existence, should never find itself being questioned by the citizens, by the media, or by anybody that walks in front of this board. Why can't you pledge? I will not have any business or professional relationship with the city or work for any business entity or professional firm that does so. Why can't you pledge that? To say that it limits the pool from which appointees can be selected is just a fallacy. There are thousands of citizens in Tallahassee who will not have any conflict serving on this board with any standard that you've imposed or suggested or that I've suggested. There are thousands of housewives, there are thousands of husbands and car salesmen and others that we should be encouraging to get on this board. Not just the people in the know, not the people with the political connections, but the citizens that need to be on this board. Why can't this board pledge I'm not affiliated with any business or professional entity which is currently applying for or bidding with the city for a contract? Do any of you have any problem with that? I think that every member of this board has no problem saying that you do not have a private relationship, public or financial commitment or arrangement with any member of the city commission or the staff, the city manager's office or staff, the city auditor, city clerk, chief of police, or the fire chief. Is it okay for a member of this board to owe money to chief of police? Is that okay? Is it okay for the chief of police to owe you money? I think not. I think it's very obvious the answer is no. During my term on the board, I will not be employed by, contract with, or have any business or professional relationship other than service on the board with the city of Tallahassee, or I will not be affiliated with any business or political or professional firm that does so. I will not be employed by, contract with, or have any business or professional relationship with the city of Tallahassee or its staff. During my term on the board, I will not become a candidate for office within the jurisdiction of the board. Well, I don't think anybody's going to argue that it's okay to sit on the board and run for an office, to run for the city commission and be able to go out and campaign on the basis of, I'm on the board of ethics. You should elect me to the city commission. I'm an ethical guy. Proof is I'm on the board of ethics. You should not be able to run for an office while you're on this board. If you want to run for office, you're free to do so. Resign from the board. Independence was the basic structure of this board. Independence. Remember, independence is the lifeblood of this board. And if this board yields its independence to the city commission or anybody else, if the members of this board allow themselves to be swayed by, lobbied by any member of the city commission or city staff, they should not be serving on this board. Any issue that comes before this board should be independently decided by the board, not based on what someone in power with the city told you you should do or suggested that you do. There will be people working in the city, elected and appointed officials, who will try to sway you. They will lobby you. Whether it's at a barbecue or your next door neighbor's house or whatever it is. I will report to the board at the commencement of the next public meeting the content of any verbal, written, or electronic contact by any official representative of the city of Tallahassee or on any issue being addressed by the board. Is it a problem for any member of this board to announce to the other members of the board and to the public, on this particular case or on this particular issue, I got a call from so-and-so at the city who had a very strong or had a very specific position on that issue? Is that a problem with anyone on this board, that the other board members should know you are being lobbied by someone else outside this board? I don't think that any member of this board thinks that that should be okay. And finally, I have suggested I will be accountable to the citizens of Tallahassee and the board for my actions that are found by the board to be in conflict with this pledge. And I will abide by the decision of the board regarding its resolution. Now, the hard way to say it is if a member of this board realizes that they have a conflict, under this guideline, they must come to the board and say, I have realized I have a conflict, or potentially I will have a conflict, and get guidance from the board. From the board. Not from legal counsel, not from the city attorney, not from the chief of police, not from the mayor, but from the board. The board members should say, that is a conflict. Whatever standard you impose, that is a conflict, or it is not a conflict. The board should be the peer review of its members. So rise above the standards that the state law imposes, rise above the standards that the city ethics guidance imposes, and tell the citizens of Tallahassee, I am not going to have any conflict. And if I have a conflict, I will resolve it, or I will resign from the board. It's not okay, as you've seen every board you ever see, every elected or appointed board, you have to state your conflict and then move forward. You were not here last time when I discussed this. I made this point before. But under the ethics code, you must state a conflict. What that says is it's okay to have a conflict as long as you tell the public you got it, right? But I totally disagree with that, because the public, then you are restricted only by the extent to which either the media or the public or someone will review further what your actions are up to that point. It's not okay to me for a member of this board to say, my brother has a contract with the city, and or my brother and I have a contract with the city. Now, the question every citizen is going to ask is, let me restate that. The assumption that the vast majority of citizens are going to make are that if he gets a contract, it's going to be because he's on the board. So eliminate that issue beforehand. Rise above the standards imposed on all others. You cannot be the conscience, you cannot be the ethical guide for this city if you play by the same rules or by the same standards of all other city employees or appointees or elected officials. A meaningful pledge is a vehicle for reassuring a doubting public. To the extent possible, the media, the members of the board are not just political appointees who, like all other political appointees, deserve no particular trust or credibility, but are themselves, but the board are citizens who have voluntarily made a public commitment of ethical behavior above the standards imposed on all other employees, public officials. To accomplish this primary purpose, a pledge of having no conflict or a personal ethics statement must be written in such a way and presented in such a way and easily understood by the least of our citizens, the least educated of our citizens, the least aware of our citizens, The second purpose of a pledge is to create a path by which board members and staff may make a public commitment to avoid any conflict of interest and to submit themselves for peer review. If you are going to pass a personal ethics statement that imposes no new standard on you, none, that imposes no new standard, then you have to do so, then go ahead and do it. But it's like I suggest to you that in doing that, you will lose an opportunity in the fledgling stage of this board. You will have lost an opportunity to send a message, a very clear message, to the public, to the media, that we have a higher standard we are imposing on ourselves. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Poitevin. Mr. Friedman.
A couple
For
questions. First of all, is it legal to impose a higher standard on the board than required by city and state law? I have no idea what the answer is. I'd like to know. Second, as I look at these things, the vast majority of them, I think a reasonable person would tend to accept and inculcate as part of their personal views, whether it's written here or not. And so I do question the utility of trying to reduce what you want to do ethically to 5 points or 10 points or 3 points. It really doesn't matter particularly. I think that we're kind of going down a path where if we start to set everything in stone, something that's a little bit outside, there'll be no way to deal with it. I would prefer, and that's the reason I asked this for an up or down vote, I would posit that when Mr. Poitevin said either don't have one at all or have a really good one, I'm not sure there is a really good one. As I listen more and more to everything that I'm hearing, I get more and more concerned that it's just, I don't know where it stops. And I think that's the reason I would like to move that we take this idea of having a personal ethics statement up, and I'd like to take a vote, yea or nay, as to whether the board wants to have one or not.
Mr. Friedman, you are recognized for a motion.
I move that we vote to up or down on whether we want to have an ethics statement. Not any particular one, just a statement.
Okay. And a second? Okay, I think we're in a quandary. I am...
Wait, Mr. Davis.
Mr. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate if I made a comment without a second?
Certainly, for a comment.
I think there have been interesting, strong points made on both sides of this issue. I know, I don't know, here's some of the thoughts going around in my mind. One of the things I think we've talked about all along, and it concerns me in our work, it's going to be a concern I think we have to be careful with all along. Are we doing everything we're supposed to do? Are we coming up to that point, and are we ever going beyond it? And we don't have the right to, we're supposed to do our job, and we don't have the authority to go beyond what our job is. We ought to do our job fully and 100%, but we ought not to take on something that's not our job. And so there's some gray areas, or seems to me, in the referendum. There's a provision I just saw a while ago that says a structure. We shall adopt bylaws and due process procedures for the administration of the Ethics Board. On down towards the bottom of that paragraph, it says a structure shall be established for the Ethics Board that ensures independence and impartiality. Well, does that include a pledge? When you look at the City of Jacksonville charter, I was looking at that earlier. They have a provision, for example, that says the Ethics Commission members shall not use their position in any manner that decreases public trust or gives the appearance of impropriety. The Ethics Commission shall establish internal operating rules or bylaws to effectuate this provision. So when I read that, I wonder, well, what did the city of Jacksonville do to effectuate that? What are their internal rules or bylaws? And I wonder if we would benefit to look at what the city of Jacksonville has done, what other cities in Florida have done to better educate us so that we don't fail to do our job and that we don't do something that's not our job. I know some think we ought to vote on this. I think there was a letter to the editor recently where some said we need to take care of business and vote on it, and that's a person's a friend of mine, and I respect his thoughts. But the longer I look at this, the more I realize there are a lot of things to think about, and it's not just as simple. It's not as simple as I originally thought it would be. Talking too much. Sorry.
I agree. I'm going to say, for lack of a second, the motion fails.
That's fine.
Ms. Phillips. Hang on, Ms. Phillips.
Since you took one comment, can you take another?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. First, I feel very strongly that this board, and it's my commitment, I can't speak for anyone else, but I believe I am held to a higher standard because I am on the independent ethics board. I've never considered myself to be unethical, ever. And part of my requirement for being on this board, and I'm going to go back to those two again, is the higher standard for all other boards, because I know I hear you saying we should be held to a higher standard than any other boards or committees that the city has. I didn't have to fill out a financial disclosure for any other board I sat on. Now, do I think that it's probably a wise idea? No, because we didn't have any influence anyway. But, I mean, we were an advisory committee on the utilities. But I resigned from that utilities advisory committee because it was definitely a conflict of interest, because if anything came up about that. But I also resigned from the Southern Shakespeare Festival. And I don't know that there is any conflict. However, that festival, for the first time ever, receives some in-kind or some sort of grant from the city. And not that I was asked to resign, I did it because I didn't want there to be any opportunity for anybody to consider that I was unethical, even though I wouldn't have been serving as a volunteer coordinator for that committee.
May I say, you certainly achieved great respect by doing so, too.
Well, thank you. But, I mean, I think we are held to a higher standard than any other board or a commission or committee of the city of Tallahassee. I think there's no doubt about that.
Thank you.
So thanks.
Mr. Chair, I'm delighted to withdraw that motion because I think we just had the discussion we needed to have and somehow it just didn't seem to be happening. This is good. I think we need to look further. I think we don't have the answer yet, but I think it's worth looking to see if we can find it.
Okay. We will bring it back. With that, we have finished agenda item 6. We are going to take a break, and we will come back on agenda item 7.
Sauces, balls,
We are going to roll. We need to finish by 6:40 when we will lose a quorum.
Okay, we will do that.
So item 7, Ms. Meadows-Keefe and Mr. Currington.
Okay, this is real fast. This is a real fast item, and Mr. Currington might be able to speak to it in more detail because he was the one involved with Mr. Shelley, but our penalty recommendations were forwarded to the city. We tasked our council with working through that and coming up with an ordinance that will be presented to the City Commission for hearing at the next commission meeting, which is next Wednesday. So that'll be the first time they have an opportunity to look at it. And then it will be voted on at I believe, the first meeting in April. So it's there for your review, and any additional comments, I'll refer to Mr. Currington.
If I may, I just wanted to make sure the board was fully aware that we, pursuant to the instructions of the board, I negotiated and exchanged drafts with Mr. Shelley. And in that process, I was made aware, I guess, that prior to my arrival, there were early discussions by this board about concurrent jurisdiction. Did we have concurrent jurisdiction with the State Ethics Commission enforcing Chapter 112? And I think the presumption was that, yes, you did. This is stepping back from that, arguably, so I want you to be fully aware of that. And the reason we're stepping back is if you take a look at this nice handy charter amendment again that Richard was so kind to distribute, if you look at Section 2B and then VII, have the authority to investigate complaints and to levy those civil penalties as may be authorized by the City Commission for violation of the city's ethics code. Upon further reflection, my legal recommendation is that is your authority, and that you do not have concurrent jurisdiction with the State Ethics Commission. So we amended the draft. The original draft of this penalties provision said that the City Ethics Code, it said, well, it's easier just to read that paragraph A. If you look at the penalties, paragraph A, any violation of the city's ethics code, including but not limited to failure to file financial disclosures for elected officials, failure to file disclosure requirements for lobbyists representing the city, failure to file disclosure of offers of employment to elected officials, and then, or violation of any standard of conduct imposed by. The original draft said Chapter 112 Florida statutes or Article 2, Section 8 of the Constitution. We have stricken that and just said city's ethics code. So I just wanted you to be aware of that change. We're sort of stepping back from concurrent jurisdiction.
And this was just for information. It's not for a vote. It's now up to the commission to vote.
Right. And we are going to, at a future meeting, have a discussion of the city ethics code, so we are fully cognizant of, we spend a lot of time talking about 112. A lot of our training is oriented toward 112. But our authority, according to the charter, is the city ethics code, which would be in the ordinances. And so we need to make, I want to make sure that I, as a board member, can distinguish between the two. There may be places where it could be a violation of both, like state and federal law. You can violate sometimes both of them if you're really lucky. But I want to make sure that I'm not thinking that we have jurisdiction because I'm thinking of 112 and not of the ordinances. So this is something we will come back to, but that's what the City Commission is considering. Item 8 is the bylaw for advisory opinions.
Is this mine, Mr. Chair?
It is.
All right.
Sorry, you're recognized.
So pursuant to instructions from the board and pursuant to our practice in the past when we're doing bylaws, I've presented for your review a preliminary draft of the bylaw that would govern our issuance of advisory opinions. So we received an opinion from Mr. Currington several meetings back indicating that it was within our authority or within the board's authority to issue these opinions. So upon instructions, I attempted to put together this process for how that would work. And in doing this, I consulted the State Ethics Commission process for how they issue ethics opinions, and also looked at various other local ethics boards to look at their practices, and also provided the chair with an opportunity to make comments, and Mr. Currington. So this product would become final upon your vote at the next meeting, pending any additions, corrections. Ms. Phillips likes grammar, so I don't know, she may have comments, but this is what we sketched for first review.
Okay, does anybody have questions of Ms. Meadows-Keefe or comments on the draft? Anything that shouldn't be in there, anything that's missing? I had a chance to review it a couple weeks ago, so.
I haven't looked at it
Ms.
yet,
Phillips.
but I will.
Okay, it will.
Technical.
It will be back at the next meeting where we can make any final adjustments, but if you have anything major as an individual, obviously you can't talk to me, but you can share any substantial concern or substantive concern with Ms. Meadows-Keefe between now and then, so that she can have some alternative for the board to consider, because I would like to go ahead and get this adopted.
And Board Member Phillips, whatever grammar smithing or editing you'd like to do, I'm happy to receive and incorporate in the final draft so that we have the best product possible.
Item 10, for those of you who were here last meeting, you remember I have the goal of establishing subcommittees, if you will, 5 subcommittees, one for each of you, giving the chair a pass, which sounded like a good idea to me. Mr. Davis would be, in my view, would be tasked with looking at that list of kind of due process, potential policies and procedures related to due process, so that if we do get a complaint, we are in good shape on that stuff, and helping, working with staff to identify any of those that are important for us to have in place on policies. Ms. McNeil would be our budget subcommittee, so that from my perspective at least, any budget issue that comes up, I'm going to look to her for an explanation, and to her to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, and whatever she says, I'm just like any of the others of you, I'm going to go with. Ms. Phillips would be looking more broadly at city ethics policies and procedures, particularly some of these subunits, and helping us identify places where we might make recommendations or identify potential problem areas. And we also suggested that in terms of technical, purely technical revisor bill, if you're in the legislative process, revisor bill type changes to existing policies, that after we've adopted them, that she's going to be our editor-in-chief, and that those changes would just get made. If we spell out Florida statutes in one place and put F period, S period in one other, and flaw stat in a third, that she'll fix those and advise Julie to fix it, and we won't bring it before the board for those, you know, comma should be a semicolon, a semicolon should be a colon. I think I was describing her as our literacy master last time. Mr. Ojitayo would be tasked with making sure that we are as transparent as possible, particularly as the vice chair. That would be, I think, significant to be willing to poke me on a regular basis and say, you need to talk about that more, you need to make sure that's fully discussed. And that would include all the stuff that we post on the internet, on our website, or any comments or recommendations we might have on other portions of the city's internet website. And then Mr. Friedman would take the lead on working with staff and figuring out where we need to be on investigatory stuff, with the idea of how should we conduct an investigation, how should we document an investigation, and what do we need to do in the sense of, if we ever need a formal investigator that goes beyond the skills of staff, what do we need to have in place? Do we need to have some pre-established contacts? All of it, to work through all of that stuff. And I think all of these are probably things that we could accomplish substantial portions of during this calendar year, and maybe the subcommittees evolve. But if that's okay, I would love a motion to say, let's have 5 subcommittees. Because that's simply my thought at this point.
So moved.
Ms. Davis, motion?
Second.
Second, a couple seconds. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, and it passes.
We skipped item 9.
Oh, did I? I'm sorry, I skipped item 9. What happened? I didn't have a hand. I apologize. Item 9, Ms. Meadows Keefe. I didn't have a piece of paper in front of me, and I rolled right past it. Item 9 is hearing complaints under 4D, which is the campaign contribution.
And this will be super quick. But before I do that, I wanted to pop this up. It's really small, but it was a news release today that our campaign contribution refund program, I think as I referenced before, it is live as of today, apropos with it being Presidential Preference Primary Day. I did not plan that, but it just worked out. So the PDF is a fillable form, and I thanked a lot of people before. So here's the actual link. It's on our webpage. And the request I would have is if you have civic groups that you all are involved in that would be interested in hearing about this program, I am always willing to do PowerPoint presentations. I have one. I will travel to get the public educated about this. I still have encountered people that when I run into them and speak about this program, they don't know about it, or they're surprised to hear about it. And so I think one goal of the proponents was to get participation. So as much as we can educate folks, the more participation and the better it will be. With that, this is only 5 slides, I swear. Last meeting, or the meeting before, you all had voted on a revised way we were going to get the program implemented. Actually, I think that was last meeting, and we did it within 30 days, got it done. There's one other issue that is a decision point for this board to talk about, and that is in that last portion of the Section 4 of the Charter Amendment, and it's here that the board has some potential discretionary authority, which is a may. It's not a shall. A shall means you have to do it. A may means you have a choice. So you may adjudicate penalties and receive complaints about falsified forms, willful issuance of an official refund receipt, wasn't authorized, and to establish penalties that would again need to be approved by the City Commission. So the board may hear complaints or initiate proceedings, levy civil penalties related to violations of this section. And again, that's right there in 4D of the Charter Amendment. So again, you may do it. And I think if I get through all these slides, the question may get answered. I don't know.
We won't get it.
Mr. Friedman.
Have you spoken to the state's attorney and gotten what the prosecutive minimum for prosecution is in terms of fraud?
Well, I think that where we'd be most concerned is people that are committing perjury, because when you are signing off on the form that this is a true and correct form, and I did really make this contribution of $25, and they're submitting a false receipt, the penalty or the charge, I guess, would be perjury.
It doesn't matter what the charge is. The
I'd be
point
sent
is,
over.
we need to get a statement from the state's attorney on what they will prosecute as a minimum.
Right.
Because my guesstimation is they will not prosecute at $25.
Nope.
Thing. So we need to get something in writing from them before we do this, so we have some idea of where we're heading. Because it may be we are the sole authority, and if that's the case, maybe may ought to be shall.
Okay, I understand that. I do.
Drew, let me interrupt you for 1 second.
Sure.
Ask Mr. Currington a question. The policy, the ordinance that the City Commission will have before it in terms of penalties, relates to violations of the city's ethics code. I assume that those penalties would not apply here because this wouldn't be a violation of the city ethics code, or am I completely wrong, or is it a question you need to ponder?
My 30-second opinion is to agree with you. The Section 4 is not part of the ethics code.
Okay, so do we need then to make a recommendation to the city commission as a board if we want to have penalties that we can impose? Because we can't, when I read what's on Julie's slide, it says penalties established by the city commission. So this is another something where the city commission has to act before we can act.
Well, I mean, we would make our recommendations like we did for our other penalties, and then they would have to implement them, but they are separate from our ethics code penalties.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, I could make the argument here that unlike Section 2 that talks about civil penalties authorized by the city commission, this does not say civil level civil penalties authorized by the commission. So it's different language. It's arguable you have the power.
Right.
But
But then earlier in 4D, of course, two lawyers now going back and forth, to such candidates is an ethics offense with penalties to be established by the city commission. That's earlier in 4D, so it would seem to be a little ambiguous because the city commission would appear to have a role there, don't you think?
point taken.
Okay, don't you love this repartee?
Okay, then I'm going to continue my interruption. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, would you bring us something at the next meeting in terms of thoughts about the board, once again, writing a letter to the city commission with the recommendation for the penalties here, and some thoughts about what those penalties ought to be, if any? It may be that public shaming would be enough if we're talking about $25. If somebody manages to submit 1,000 of these, I don't know what you do. Ms. Phillips.
Do you need a motion to table this until till we find that out, or no?
No, I think we'll just go through her presentation.
Yes.
I saw a rabbit and went down the trail.
You may get clarity, or you may not, by the end of the presentation.
Quick question, though. Will we get some sort of memorandum of understanding, or whatever you call it, on a local level from the state's attorney as to how they plan to address this, if at all?
I don't know if that would be something that they'd be willing to do, because I think it depends on their discretion.
Oh, I think it
depends
definitely
on their
be something they'd be
workload.
unwilling to do, frankly, for $25.
Yeah, I do too.
But I think we need to have it in writing.
Okay, we can pursue that.
I can ask that question.
We can see what we can get, even if it's an email, because that may change what
Fine.
we want to ask the city commission to authorize in the way of penalties.
Okay, so these were just kind of thoughts that I had about potential violations, like what potential violations would look like, and some pros and cons for even doing it. So in deciding the may, whether you want to do it or not, that there would be potentially costs associated with investigation and adjudication of violations. And so this is a fiscal impact on taxpayers that may be more than the potentially small monetary amount of $25 given out inappropriately. And I will share that I have spoken with people that have run these programs statewide, specifically in the state of Minnesota. So a statewide program had very little fraud. So I don't know, nor can I quantify what very little fraud is, but I think at the initiation of this program, and I think I probably am making a recommendation to this board for their consideration, which I occasionally do, that we are running the program for less than a year. I think in 2018, we'd hope to start it in January, that we use this year as a learning time to see kind of what comes up. Now, that's not to say that if there was a huge problem with a lot of duplicate receipts and forms filed by one person, I think it would be possible to simply bar that person from submitting any future requests. My office, the Ethics Office, has been given authority to review the documents, give people the opportunity, if they mess up, to resubmit. And then once I review that again, if it's still wrong, they're finished. So they don't get a chunk of appellate rights. It's decided right there, and I think that's a very cost-effective way for handling it. Likewise, if there's a receipt that comes across that looks different than exemplars that I've received from candidates, I would simply call the candidate and say, hey, this looks funky, and I wouldn't really say that, but there's a discrepancy here, and I'm looking at the Supervisor of Elections website report, and it would seem to be an issue. Can you please check on that? And I think that if there's a habitual problem there, your recourse is to send it to the Elections Commission or a similar entity. So there are things that we can do absent setting up a formal adjudicatory process and recommending penalties. So the discussion and vote that I was hoping to get is, do you wish to do it? Alternatively, would you prefer to track potential violations, gauge the violations, and make more formal action after the initial election cycle? And if false claims are discovered, we would simply just not issue the refund. I think we've got pretty good controls in place, and if we didn't think they were deserving of a refund, they simply would not receive it. And again, I did think about the state attorney, but Mr. Friedman makes a good point that I doubt they would want to be bothered with those types of claims.
One suggestion, if you considered doing a random audit, and that would entail every so many that you get making a phone call and checking on it.
Sure.
I think something like that, if, out of every 10 you do one, it shouldn't be too burdensome, hopefully. And it does give you another control. You actually call the person, did you make this claim? And find out. I think that might be very, very useful.
That's a good recommendation.
Yeah.
And with that, I'm going to come sit back down. That concludes the presentation, and I know y'all will want to discuss.
Questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Davis?
I had just a question, and Mr. Friedman, I'm not sure if I heard everything Mr. Friedman said about the state attorney, but I would gather that this type of offense would probably violate a criminal statute in Florida for fraud. Probably at this level of money would be a misdemeanor, I'm sure.
I doubt it's even prosecutable. I mean, I don't think that they would devote the time to prosecute it. Well, that lower level is my concern.
I would
maybe you would
wonder on the flip side of the discussion if they would see something like this as so. I mean, when you're talking about fraudulent steps in regard to voting, and that they may want to use as a public example.
Well, that's the reason I suggested seeing if we could get a memorandum of understanding with that office to do these. In fact, that would be ideal. I mean, my guess is they may say it's below their minimum. Maybe we can convince them it isn't something that should be below their minimum. That's another issue altogether. But until you ask them, you have no idea.
Yeah.
It might also be fact-specific. My impression from my discussions with Ms. Meadows-Keefe is if somebody fills one of these out and it turns out they don't live in the city limits, and they didn't realize they didn't live in the city limits, but they made a campaign contribution. Maybe they live in a community or a neighborhood they've tried to annex 6 times, so they think the city's important in their life. That's not somebody we're going to turn over for criminal prosecution because they,
But Richard, all
just didn't
prosecutions are
qualify.
Discretionary. You don't have to prosecute someone ever.
Well, but the question is, do we have to turn everything over to the prosecutor?
No, I don't see that we have any
think we do either.
responsibility there either. I mean, if something is more in the realm of a mistake than there's no mens rea. I mean, this is an intent crime.
Right.
And if we can't have a pretty good idea that there's a criminal intent, we'd never refer it, I would hope.
Okay. So you'll come back to us with something a little bit more definitive on when it would be the kind of of violation that would kick to a board action versus just a staff, oh, sorry, you didn't qualify. You submitted this twice, but there's some technical reason you don't qualify. Those are just people get a pass. But when it looks like it's something serious, it would be referred to the Elections Commission or the state attorney. I think probably the board might need to be involved in those decisions.
Well, yeah, and Mr. Chair, I think pursuant to our last discussion, I think part of what we agreed is that at every meeting, while this process is going on, part of my report every month to the board will be on the number of receipts or applications given, number that are refused, and then that would be my opportunity, if I saw a pattern, to be able to identify that for the board. So maybe you could think about, on a case-by-case basis, looking at it as we go through the first year.
Because, Mr. Friedman, that's where I see, if the minor technical violations, we're not referring to anybody anyway. The only ones we would send to the state attorney would be those where there was a pattern or multiple submissions, that might be something they would want to respond to, because it wouldn't just be $25.
Well, I would suggest, I mean, if we're going to think of referring something to a prosecutor's office, we'd want to at least be satisfied that there was probable cause, that the intent existed to defraud the city.
Right. And that's going to be
And that's not going to exist if somebody made a mistake because of where they live. I mean, there's no intent there. They're intending to do the right thing, not to break the law.
Right. And the idea here, I think, is that those will be board decisions. The minor things Julie will take care of. Anything that gets referred is going to go through us anyway.
Any referral to another authority should be through the board as such, I think, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Okay, we are now back. I'm counting in order again. We're on 11. And this is Mr. Davis and Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
I'm going to let Mr. Davis do most of the discussing, because I think, Mr. Chair, that was your goal in this. But Mr. Davis and I had a productive meeting on Friday where we took that list of potential things to look at and identified what we thought were things the board might consider. I memorialized those in a very brief document. And having said that, I'm going to bat it over to Mr. Davis to talk about his impressions and what we thought about.
Mr. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, and we had Julie Meadows-Keefe and I had a good meeting. And you know, you have these meetings and you start getting into these things and you realize you know so much and you need to know a whole lot more. But that's good. It's the process that's beginning, and it was good to discuss with her some of the ideas, and we discussed, you know, the due process procedures that we probably need to sharpen up on. I know in looking at our bylaws, if I can find it real quick, there was a provision that the chair, within so many
days,
if I could find it.
It was 10.
Well, here it is on page 11 of the bylaws under Article 10, and subsection D, following the conclusion of a hearing, subsection C, within 10 days of a determination for a hearing, the chair shall issue an order or on procedure establishing guidelines for all parties to follow. So it looks like that's something we're going to need to add some more detail to flesh this out and get it in place. But we talked about the fact that when you look at the Florida Administrative Procedure Act, Chapter 120, which guides Florida administrative hearings with so many agencies in Florida, they have a uniform procedure for due process and the procedural time limits and the procedures on evidence. I think there's a provision there that says, for example, the strict adherence to Florida rules of evidence shall not be required. Hearsay evidence can be considered, but hearsay evidence alone could never be enough to convict someone. There's a process for motions for summary judgment or summary proceedings if the facts aren't in dispute. And in just almost one page, of that act, there's some outstanding guidelines for due process procedures. I know I've looked briefly at, so maybe before I say what I was going to say, if we referred cases to the Division of Administrative Hearings for their administrative judges to handle, then all of that would be guided by the established due process procedures of the Florida Administrative Procedure Act and long years of experience on the part of those judges. And as Julie Meadows-Keefe said, we'd have to have a group of lawyers probably available to serve as prosecutor if we went that route with the administrative law judges. I think Ms. Meadows-Keefe said that they charge about $200 an hour for that service, and they would then render a recommended order, which would then come back to this board, and we would have the responsibility to consider it and then render a final order as we saw fit. So we would be responsible for the final order. It wouldn't be taken away from us. Someone else would do the hearing work and fact-finding and applying rules of the evidentiary requirements under the Florida Administrative Procedures Act and make that recommendation. So that is a route we could take. I contacted I looked at some of the ordinance provisions of the City of Jacksonville Ethics Code, and I contacted the ethics officer. I didn't get her, but asked her if she could send us some of their provisions, because some of their ordinance provisions say that they shall establish internal operating rules and bylaws to carry out their hearings, and I'm sure they have those established. I've asked her if she would mail us a copy or email a copy. When I looked at the City of Miami Ethics Board setup, they do have established due process procedures within their rules, and they're very similar to Chapter 120 of Florida Administrative Procedure Act. Not anything that voluminous or complicated, but helpful. So I would surely be glad to put together a packet of all this, of some of these other ethics boards and what they're doing, and maybe we can then compare them to Chapter 120 in the Florida Administrative Procedure Act process. And I guess all I'm saying is, to sum it up, is I'm excited that we're moving forward, and that next time we'll be much better prepared to bring back a lot more details on due process procedures.
And I do think Mr. Davis and I agreed that it may be good to have, and I think I've spoken about this with the chair, to have Judge Cohen, who's the Chief Administrative Law Judge, come to a meeting, and he gives a very informative presentation on the services offered by DOA. So again, you know, they do great fact-finding, they have their great procedures, and then we retain authority to assess the penalty. So I think Friedman.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because I think the public, upon seeing the thing sent to an administrative judge, is going to realize no one on the board is trying in any way, shape, or form to influence the outcome. And then we'll be responsible for getting a decision and implementing it. And I think that that's superb. Yeah.
Okay. Although the one complaint we did have, we were able to handle internally. So are you suggesting that all of these would need to go to DOA, or just that the board would make there would be some decision made at some point about the complexity of the complaint?
Well, Chair,
I think it should be up to the board myself, to decide that. Sure.
Well, I think procedurally, for that first complaint, what we did was do a probable cause determination, and I think maybe the decision point would have been that if we thought, or the board thought, it needed to be prosecuted as a misuse of position, at that point, we would then notify the subject of the complaint and say, we're sending this to DOA. And I don't know if Jerry wants to hop in there, but I think procedurally we could do the same thing, kind of get a board temperature on it, take a vote, and do our hearing process through DOA. Jerry has a lot of familiarity with that process.
I think so. I don't think you have to uniformly send everything over to DOA.
Right.
You can do it on a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm.
So then, Mr. Davis, what you're going to come back to us with, there may be some things where we do adopt in our own bylaws some notice and procedural requirements, and they could be by cross-reference to 120. whatever they look like, that would be for us to operate under unless it goes to, unless we refer it to DOA. So and then we'd have some kind of, like with an investigator, we'd have some kind of pre-established relationship, if you will, with DOA, and maybe with your point number two, maybe also have, again, like we might need to know who we'd hire as an investigator if we need one. We'd know who we'd hire as an advocate, have maybe a couple of people who've indicated a willingness, who are pre-approved, kind of an approved vendor list. So if we need to move quickly, we're not out
That's what we need to do.
Searching the yellow pages. Ms. Phillips.
And I don't remember, but at one point in my legislative background, we did a list of advocates that the state has. Is that still in effect where?
I don't know. I remember what you're talking about, but that's
Why don't you try to
it was
find it?
back.
It was a funding issue, and somehow I was involved in lobbying it, and, well, I guess it would have been Department of Banking and Finance, so that was our accounting office was involved with it. But there is already a list of advocates and their charge per hour somewhere with the state system, state of Florida. So.
And it may be that the State Ethics Commission has, I think they have enough staff to do a lot of this internally, but I don't know if they had a conflict, if they have people that they go to. There may be some folks probably local here in Tallahassee, and it may not always work, but again, I think in Mr. Friedman and Mr. Davis's memo here, point number two, the idea of knowing that we've got a contact made with DOA, that we've got a contact made with an advocate, so we can move forward quickly would be really advantageous to us.
Do you know where that was funded, Richard?
I do not remember. That's been a while back.
Do you know where it's funded, Julie?
No, ma'am.
I can find out.
I know you can, and so, and I'd hope that you would assist me in that regard.
Ms. Davis and Ms. Meadows-Keefe, can you talk a little bit about three and and Mr. Currington, if you need to chime in, this whole separation of roles, because it's something I've never gotten really comfortable with, where we are judge, jury, and executioner, or potentially have some, we're going to pay for all three of those, I guess, out of our budget, and what role, how we manage those different roles.
I'll start this, and I know Jerry will have some good comments, and Mr. Davis as well, but I think especially when we got Mr. Currington, one of the first things that was discussed was kind of the role of an advocate. And then after we had our first probable cause hearing, we went through that process, we debriefed. I think there was further discussion about the role that I would play in future cases. That's doing the investigating, that's writing up the recommendation, getting the review from Mr. Currington. And, in this case, it was fairly easy because we found no probable cause. But then if there had been probable cause, who would have prosecuted that matter? And would that have been me? And would Mr. Currington be providing legal advice to the board in terms of what they should do and who would be doing what? So it seemed like the cleanest way to do it would be that if we reached a hearing stage, a formal hearing stage, that we'd have an advocate that would take the case over, and this board would serve a role in maybe establishing probable cause, whether a matter was going to be pursued or not, whether it was going to be sent to DOA or not, and that there is some conflict with the board serving as both a probable cause panel and a final hearing arbiter. So in administrative law with the different boards, we have probable cause panels that are made up of board members. If you serve on the Board of Medicine probable cause panel to evaluate a case, when that case comes back before the Board of Medicine, those people that were on probable cause cannot participate in that final decision. So we'd have to make some decisions. Would we, if we didn't go with DOA, have a probable cause panel that instead of having all 6 of you decide probable cause, we have 3 of you or 2 of you, and then whoever is left would be the one that would hear the matter if it came to the formal hearing process. So I think, and I even think I got a comment from the outside, I don't know if it was Mr. Poitevin or someone else that pointed that out. So just making sure we're clear on who's doing what and that we're doing it properly. Jerry or Mr. Davis, if you want to.
If you'll excuse me, I apologize. I have another meeting at 7 o'clock. I must go.
Okay, we are about to lose a quorum, so let me just point out that we have ethics education next month. We will, at that point, we'll come back and discuss this a possible additional workshop for board members to just discuss where we want to go, what we want to do. And with that, I think we are done.
Okay, got it. What's the date?